大家好，欢迎收看 Hive 区块链风潮，我是 Camille。为了实现完美的跨链交互体验，这位务实的天才少年在20岁时创建了公链 Herdius。他的技术方案将会解决加密货币的3大痛点：跨链交易效率低下、私钥管理复杂和链与链之间欠缺互操作性。通过虚拟钱包 Deme，Herdius 的用户可以最大限度保护自己的交易安全性和匿名性。所以，本期我们的嘉宾就是 Herdius 的创始人兼 CEO Balazs Deme。Thank you for joining us today, Balazs. So first of all, tell us about your inspiration of creating Herdius.
So the idea of Herdius became and started with creating a community-owned exchange and taking away the power from the centralized players in the field and giving it back to the community. Then during all those months we pivoted, and that's when the focus shifted onto the current decentralized exchange that we're doing now. The whole core of the product at the end of the day is community. Us as a Herdius team, we do not make anything of the fees, and it's purely an infrastructure that's open source and is developed for the community. As far as inspiration goes, and why I started the project was to create something that scales and something that's much bigger than I originally imagined. And that's what Herdius became. I never imagined when coming up and writing the technical paper that what we're building is so revolutionary and can change so many different aspects, from having this global liquidity pool to scalability, governance, maybe in the future having more custodian wallets. So the possibilities of what you can build on top of Herdius are really endless, and that's been my personal motivation on starting it.
According to your white paper and articles published on Medium, we noticed that Herdius has 3 main innovations, which are blocks on blocks, virtual wallet, and a global liquidity pool. So tell us how these 3 main innovations solve the major issues in the crypto world.
Yeah, so obviously all of these are really correlated and interconnected. I can basically go through the thought process of why these different pieces are needed. First of all, blocks on blocks is our solution to sharding that is brought up by Ethereum. Pretty much the problem with different shards is skipping across the different shards will become a problem. But in case of Herdius, where you have a single global state and then you can stack blocks on top of each other, you eliminate the problem of skipping among the shards, but also you have this possibility that you can scale endlessly because all those different blocks are mined in parallel. So the scalability is endless. The only limitation to it is how many validators we have involved. So that's why we need blocks on blocks. Is our global liquidity pool and the virtual wallet network will both have a high transaction throughput. So we need a more efficient system so that it makes sense for the user to use our chain instead of going to the main chains. Now on the virtual wallet network side, that's our solution to interoperability across the different blockchains. Essentially, when I started and when I looked at the different blockchains, I realized the private key is the one thing you have in common. So if you can interconnect the chains on the private key level, you eliminate all these communication channels and complex systems that need to be set up. So what I decided to do is take the private keys or the wallet and virtualize it. So basically have the different parts of a key with different nodes in their system, and that way you eliminate this problem of having to implement one by one with every single chain, and you can have a solution that scales in the future even if us as a dev team were to ever stop development. On the side of global liquidity pool, that's more or less like the first use case that I imagined. Because if you have this perfect interoperability, you can have a blockchain decentralized exchange and global liquidity pool that contains any kind of asset. So we don't have to whitelist, enable any coins. Anyone can adopt and implement their blockchain with our system, and then every asset can be traded on it. So my thinking was to create something brand new out of the box that can bring a lot of innovations through a very simple solution of splitting up the private keys. And I think that's the core idea behind Herdius.
Fair enough. So what's the product timeline now? Do you have any MVP so far?
Yeah, so we have been working and developing since February thanks to our pre-sale, which has gone really well. So now what we have kind of closed source and not open source yet is a perfect, fully functional bridge between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Essentially, what that allows you to do is if you hold Bitcoin in your wallet, you can interact with any kind of smart contract or dApp based on Ethereum straight from your wallet using Bitcoin. And that's what pretty much a perfect bridge means. And we plan to open source it at the end of September, so the community can use it, you can already build on top of it. And then as far as the next step goes is to, on this architecture, develop the global liquidity pool. As a first step, I would want to bridge, the 0x layers and Kyber network and all the decentralized exchanges, just Herdius being a middleman. And that should happen in October or more towards the end of the year.
Yeah, speaking of open source, what type of language are you using?
So everything we do is developed in Golang. I choose Golang because it's just so simple and it stops you from making very stupid mistakes at the compiling. And it's also a language that more and more blockchain projects are adopting because it's just so robust and can be used for so many different things.
What about the mainnet?
So as far as mainnet goes, I want to develop the product in different steps. So first of all, open source what we have now, which is an architecture that's not tied to our blockchain, then create the liquidity pool, and then build the different pieces of our architecture one by one. So mainnet will probably happen middle of next year as far as the blockchain mainnet goes, but obviously the global liquidity pool will be on the mainnet, let's say, as far as the end of the year.
All right. So actually, I noticed in the market, we already have similar cross-chain projects. For example, Polkadot, Cosmo, OneChain. So tell us how you differentiate Herdius to the others and what makes Herdius is better than the others.
Yeah, so I think not necessarily better, but we do take a different approach to things. All the other projects, or pretty much a large sum of interoperability protocols, have their own specific sidechain that needs to transform information that happens in their chain to the format of whatever main chain they're going back to. And the problem becomes that these protocols need communication channels or bridges to be set up, which should not be a problem. Essentially, a dev team can solve that. But at the end of the day, each of the blockchains actually have to adopt these channels one by one. And as far as how ineffective blockchain governance goes, I don't think that's the right solution. So in our case, since we preserve the native key format of any chain we're going back to, there's no information to digest. So from the perspective of Bitcoin network, let's say, there can be a wallet holding 10 Bitcoins on the Bitcoin network, but maybe that has 10,000 owners inside our chain. So when one of the users moves assets back to the Bitcoin network just sees a transaction packet in their native format and they know it's valid. So there's no data conversion or any kind of communication channel or hybrid nodes needed to be set up.
So can I put it this way? Herdius is faster than the other similar blockchains.
Yes, not only faster, but also easier to adopt, easier for the user to use. There's no overhead for anyone. So what we want to allow, and that's the vision, is we want to enable you that no matter which asset you have inside your wallet, that you can use and interact with any blockchain seamlessly. And if there's all these complex systems in the background, it will be really cumbersome to use for the user. So we are more or less like a more simpler solution to the big problems that are present.
So okay, then give us an example. Let's say one Herdius user want to send Ethereum to a non-Herdius user. Tell us how Herdius make it faster and safer.
Yeah, so what we give to the user, and what the user can also bring, is their own private key. This single Herdius private key is then interconnected to all the different identities / public addresses, private keys on all the different blockchains that the user owns. So every interaction, transaction, data transfer, message signing you do inside Herdius happens the same way, no matter if it's between another Herdius user or if it's outside the network. So if, let's say, there's a trade between Bitcoin and Ether, or Ether with another Herdius user, what I do is I gain the right for the reassembly process for the other person. So let's say me and you exchange Ether.
Yeah.
I just gain the right to your wallet. And whenever I move the funds back to the Ethereum main network, it's actually your wallet's private key that gets reassembled. So I just own the assets inside the Herdius chain, but from the perspective of the Ethereum main chain, it's still inside your wallet. But whenever I sign, you know that I send it to another user, the original private key is reassembled and the funds are moved. So it's a very simple process for the user. All the complexities are handled in the back end. And as far as security goes, we make sure that as a network we take snapshots, each key piece of the individual private keys backed up so it doesn't get lost. We also have a threshold signature scheme, meaning not all of the holders of the private key parts need to be online, only more than a majority. And I think, you know, that's the way we look forward to make it as secure as possible and that no things can go bad in the future.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. You mentioned the private keys. So tell us about your private key mechanism.
Yeah, inside Herdius, we still give the user a single private key, but all that private key is connected to all the different identities in the backend. So for the user, the process of sending a transaction to another Herdius user or to a non-Herdius user is the same process. You just sign this transaction inside your wallet, and whatever happens in the background, you as a user should not care. So the process goes that if I send you Ether inside the Herdius network, and you were to move that to a non-Herdius user, that's when my original private key is reassembled, but you still sign with your Herdius address. All the processes that happen in the background is basically meaning that my private key is reassembled and you're just triggering that process using your Herdius private key. So you can have the case of having 10 Ethereums inside the wallet inside Ethereum, but maybe that has 100 different owners inside the Herdius network. And when one of those owners moves the funds back, that's when the original owner's private key is reassembled across the different nodes.
So there is one concept raised up in your white paper, Deme, distributed virtual wallet. So tell us what's the relations between Deme and your private key?
Yeah, essentially, when you look at a wallet is just a collection of your different private keys.
Yeah.
What Deme does, it just simplifies the process so that there's only a single private key, and then all the different private keys on all the different blockchains are just handled inside our blockchain through the different nodes. So inside Deme is not only our wallet. So of course Herdius will release a wallet, but instead what we allow is that any kind of wallet developer can just take their existing wallets and just make it compatible with our system. Because essentially, as I previously said, there's a private key which only stays with the user at all times. And that private key is just tied in with the backend. So Deme is more or less a collection of all your identities across the chains. And it's just a process of what I mentioned of virtualizing the different keys and managing it. So that's essentially what Deme is.
Okay. So next question might be a little bit harsh on you.
Okay.
So the Chinese investors, after they read your white paper, they're questioning. Catena Capital has invested you last year in July, and that was the first round. And now your valuation stays same as 36,000 Ethereum. So tell us why. Why it remains the same for this 1 year?
So since we're talking percentages, there's no questioning of market cap. And initially when we set out with the project, there wasn't a certain goal that we wanted to hit. Actually, if you look at the very early stages of the project, the first presentations and conferences I did, it was always mentioned that we have a flexible target, and if we don't reach it, then all the tokens are burned. Now, obviously that has shifted during the months and that we've been doing this legal work, but pretty much it's the same setup, that Catena Capital always owned 3% of whatever tokens we issue. And obviously the valuation at this round is lower, but that will not be the case in the future. So they for sure knew when we started the whole thing that this 3% will be worth a significant sum over the next couple of rounds and into the future.
So right now the ETO still count as the first round of fundraising?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the plan with the ETO was to really kickstart our community, especially in this region, but also to allow and more or less democratize the whole pre-sale that we have, because the community is just such a crucial piece inside our architecture. So that's, I think, just a nice way to do this airdrop or this community kickstarting, so that we can prepare for additional funding rounds and higher valuations.
Okay. Comparing with other projects, you are releasing 38% of your tokens in the first fundraising. So tell us, how are you going to spend those money?
So we always set out to be as fair and as transparent as possible. And that's, how the German setup can help us, because going through a German ICO process requires you to have different procedures put in place that otherwise would not be the case for traditional ICO companies. So for example, what that means for us is we are professionally managing all the Ether we raise, but also we are publishing our books. So regular audits, publishing what we spend money on, and that we follow our roadmap. So the roadmap that's outlined in the white paper, how much percentage we spend on, development, marketing, legal, will all be published, and the community will get as much of an overview as we possibly can give. And that has always been the plan, to kind of handle all these funds that we raise from the community in a transparent and trustful way.
Sure. Since this is the first round of funding, tell us your plan for next, like second round and third round.
Yeah, so my thinking is to kind of do different funding stages and higher valuations in different regions and demographics. So initially, maybe kickstart something in the US, something inside Europe, maybe Germany, and then have more rounds where we can really qualify the people who invest in us, and we can pick, we can have a really tight whitelist like we did now for the ETO. But also, I want to be in a position as a company to be able to pick my community members and people who support us, rather than just have something that has no value in the future and that, can just be dropped by the different people. So as far as different funding rounds goes, actually, we plan to have another funding round as soon as end of next month, being able to close, just because all these tokens we have sold so far in the first round will be unlocked very, very soon. And when they hit exchanges, we want to make sure that we also hit our targets as far as reaching next valuations goes.
Okay, so let's talk about the tokens. Herdy's tokens is called HER.
Yes.
Tell us how HER tokens is going to work in the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, so for Herdy's, I decided to modify DPoS. What that means is, instead of it being a federated system, the Herdy's token can be used as staking currency, but there's no minimum required to stake. So if you buy 10 Herdy's tokens, you can stake that, you can participate as a validator, and you will earn proportionate fees to how much you stake. Now, the process of how staking goes is very, very simple. So if we have a 100 Bitcoin transaction that goes through the Herdy's chain, all the fees from that transaction go to the different validator groups. So if I put down 10 Herdy's tokens, and that represents, let's say, 10% of the total stake required for that transaction, then that's the amount of fees I will earn. That's why we also say in the white paper is we have dynamic minting and inflation, and that the Herdy's token should be relative to the price of the transaction volume flowing through, because essentially all the fees that are earned through the network go through all the miners and all the validators. So essentially, as I previously mentioned, we have really soon we have this bridge between the different DEXs online. So if we have a huge volume of trade orders that we can handle, that already gives back a lot of value to the community. Yeah,
by the way, how does DEX and the centralized exchange work on Herdy's?
Yeah, so that's the really cool part is unlike other solutions, or unlike other DEXs or interoperability protocols, we don't really need APIs or whatsoever to be needed to be set up by the centralized exchanges. A large problem with centralized exchanges coming in is that they need all this infrastructure to be set up by each individual DEX. Now in our case, as far as centralized exchanges goes, they can just use our wallet network as their hot wallets, and they can match orders with our order book very seamlessly. On the other hand, as far as DEXs go, all the DEXs on the different chains, but pretty much it's all dominated by 0x protocol. So the plan now is, and that due to the fact that we do everything on the private key level, it's really easy for them to just open an address inside our chain and just share liquidity among the others. So as far as that goes, you can imagine Herdius being like a centralized order book, or more or less like a bridge between all these different parties. So that puts us in a really good position where we don't have to compete for our own liquidity. And I think everyone in the community knows that's kind of one crucial aspect where DEXs are lacking. So I think we can really well handle that and solve that very easily.
Tell us how Herdius is going to earn money in the future.
Yeah, so Herdius itself, we pretty much want to leave it to the governance, because we have a inflation rate involved of 3% that currently goes to master nodes and the good actors in the system. But we have all the funds and all the ETOs and the different funding rounds we'll do will allow us to develop our product as planned. And then in the future, if the community decides to support us and give us part of the newly minted tokens, then we'll take it. If not, then I'll be more than happy if someone takes over development, or if it's an open source project at the end of the day. It should be made by the community and developed further by the community. On the other hand, what my plans are as a company or as a next product is, you can imagine very well different centralized products or services offered on top of the Herdius chain. So we would have separate teams working on that. But the goal is always that all the funding we raise during the ICO rounds are put back to develop the open source infrastructure.
Sure.
And all the rest of the services, how these things will develop, will obviously use traditional venture capital.
So is there something that you want to speak to your Chinese community?
Yes, I think it has been a great pleasure, and everyone was so welcoming in this community. But I feel like a lot of times what's missed about Herdius is how we have this really simple and cool architecture of generating distributed private keys, and the opportunities of what you can build on top are endless. You can do index funds, you can do stable coins, universal identity. So I would urge everyone to contribute ideas, to just take what Herdius is and share it among their peers, and see, you know, what cool projects they can collaborate on and bring out. Because I feel like if we get this right, then the possibilities of what we can do and contribute to the whole blockchain world are pretty amazing. So I want everyone to spread the word, and thank you for all the support, and I'm sure we'll do a lot more in the region and come back as soon as possible to help others do events and speak at conferences.
Yeah, so what about the Chinese investors?
Yeah, so for the Chinese investors, I look forward to have all of you on board and to work together. And obviously our plan is to have a more stable base inside China, or as far as the Asian region goes, so that we can directly, you know, look at this space, organize events, meetups, talk with developers, collaborate with other projects. So for Chinese investors, I mean, thanks for all the support, and then looking forward to work together.
Yeah, okay. The final question, something very personal. Tell us your favorite song.
My favorite song is probably the movie soundtrack from Interstellar and Ex Machina. But also I really like Tron Legacy, the movie, and I always listen to the soundtrack when I work, so that would be probably my favorite song.
Thank you so much, Balazs, for joining us tonight. I wish you and Herdius has a great success. Thank you for watching Hive Blockchain Talk.
Thank you.